I was looking back through the transcript of our conversation that we had in 2022.
Wow.
And I realized that in that conversation, you were going through and you were explaining, the origins of the war, the need for a diplomatic solution to, and here we are. And I honestly, like, much of what you said to me could have been said here today in May of 2025.
Nathan, we spoke after the war began, after
Yeah.
Russia launched the war. So we are now here, May 2025. Thousands of Ukrainian and Russian men, some women, have been killed in a war that is far more reminiscent of World War One, the mud, the trenches, block by block, as opposed to the war that has just been commemorated, the 80th anniversary of World War II. There is some diplomacy. President Biden did not talk to Putin for 3 years.
Hmm.
That has been documented. And I find that criminal simply because both powers have nukes. Also, when you cut off relations, it goes down the pipeline. So there's no dialogue. President Trump, whatever one thinks, odious, toxic, vulgar,
We can do
corrupt,
an hour just of the adjectives to
just with the
describe Donald.
adjectives, has this perverse insight that it might be better to end a war than see more men killed. And he's, the stuff with Putin, Nathan, we've talked about that. I mean, the Putin puppet stuff is so tired. And, Putin is not a pussy. He's not being whipped around. He's holding out. Trump has walked away. Trump, who said he could solve the Ukrainian crisis in a day, 24 hours, has found that diplomacy often demands patience. I'm sure you know that it took 4.5 to 5 years for that illuminating figure, Henry Kissinger, and his Vietnamese counterpart to end the Vietnam War. But we are faced now with the two countries have met. The United States and Russia had dialogue May 15th in Istanbul. There's been a dialogue lower level between Russia, Ukraine. And that's important. There are a lot of people who are saying nothing's going to happen until Trump and Putin meet. There's summit seems off the agenda right now. But it is the case that summits often happen after the lower level diplomats have worked out what will be signed. So in any case, I just came back from Europe. I was there for 2 weeks. I wanted Lee Hochstadter, I don't know if you remember him. He's at the Washington Post, that benighted Bezos paper. I think David Ignatius, who's usually the foreign policy guy who gets a lot of whispering from the CIA and intelligence, has gone soft in the sense he sees the need for peace. So Lee Hochstadter writes, Europe's race to rearm is accelerating at warp speed and not nearly fast enough. In the face of mounting Russian...
Not nearly fast enough.
Well, what I saw when I was
warp
in Europe
speed.
Was that in the UK, in France, and in Germany, there is a narrative that if they don't rearm, they will be invaded. First, the Baltics, maybe Poland, will be invaded by Russia. So that is leading these countries to spend billions of dollars rearming, partly because they believe they can't depend on the United States, but partly because it's a military Keynesianism that they believe will create jobs. It certainly will create jobs in the United States if we continue. So I'm just saying there's this fear of Russia, the sense of an imminent threat that one doesn't even feel here. Obviously, it's a continent, it's different. But it's not leading to a smart politics. And it's not even leading to greater security for Ukraine because the battles go on and Russia is overwhelmingly hyper militarily armed. Last thing I'll say is that Ukraine has discovered drones. And, more important than the drones is U.S. intelligence, which I don't know where that sits or stands, but U.S. intelligence based on this 10,000-word New York Times article has been key to Ukrainian fighting and surviving.
There's a few things I want to ask you about in there. I was hoping you could help me a little better understand the Trump administration's approach to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because every time I open the newspaper, and I think a lot of people probably have this experience, they there is a kind of paradox or contradiction in Donald Trump, where Donald Trump is a militarist one moment and a peacemaker the next. And one moment, Donald Trump will be on the record saying, we need to end this war immediately. I want to end it in 24 hours. We need to have negotiations. You don't get anything unless you're willing to talk to people. And I think, oh, thank God you understand that we need to talk to people in order to try and resolve conflict. And then I read today, Donald Trump says, actually, Putin's not serious about negotiations. We're going to wipe our hands of this. This is not our conflict. This has nothing to do with us. And Trump is considering pulling back and just not being involved with ending the war. Of course, in negotiations, this could be a feint. This could be something that you do in order. So help us a little better understand what your assessment is of what's really going on in Trump policy towards the Ukraine war.
Well, I mean, Nathan, I'm a person of humility. That's what's really going on.
Okay.
Let me try and take a stab at it. Excuse me.
Okay.
Very transactional. He is a deal maker. He's not a diplomat. And I think you see that in the way he gets impatient. Diplomats have patience. The Iran nuclear deal took 6-7 years to get to a point. But I do think he's tactical. He's transactional. He's a realist. He's not an internationalist by any measure, but he's not an isolationist either, because the United States is involved, mostly one-on-one, unipolar. But he's not pulled out of these countries. He certainly didn't pull out of Saudi Arabia. What he has pulled out of are the treaties. Treaties, by the way, were considered subversive in the Bush-Cheney years, too. But he's pulled out of Paris. He doesn't have any use for the acronyms of international engagement. He has no use for the UN, though many don't. But so I think that he's taking it case by case, and he's sending his emissaries. These are not trained diplomats. These are real estate
yes,
heavies. In
his golfing buddies.
But I agree that with Israel, it's just obscene. The idea of Gaza it's a genocide. It's not going to be a hotel place. But on Iran, there's schisms within his administration where he seems to be holding off on and telling Israel, don't bomb Iran. We're going to try and work something out. So it's very tactical. It's very fractious, and it's transactional. And that's what I see. He's already gotten a deal, Nathan. And by the way, the most important way to move forward with Russia, and this has already been off the table, is no NATO membership in terms of Ukraine, the European Union, et cetera, et cetera. But look at Trump. He's already worked out a deal with Ukraine on mineral rights. And, he's trying to get away without paying for anything, like the reconstruction, his administration following on Biden's, wants to seize Russian oligarchical assets. Well, it's not a bad idea in terms of our oligarchical culture and society, but I guarantee you no one in the United States in Treasury is going to go for seizure of Russian assets if there's any parallel that could happen toward the United States oligarchs.
That may help explain a little bit some of these contradictions that we see. I mean, even on Israel, there are contradictions where one moment he's endorsing the kind of full ethnic cleansing of Gaza, and then also you read that Israel feels more abandoned by Donald Trump than they did by Biden, who was a genuine, true believer in Zionism. And Trump is willing to.
He was a patsy. Netanyahu pushed him over, rolled him over.
Right.
And I think the Israelis, certainly Netanyahu and his close team, are surprised that Trump isn't giving them everything they want. But it's not a policy of compassion or peace, what's going on with Trump in Israel. The
Trump administration was willing to talk to Hamas directly, even though Israel didn't want them to. They worked out a deal with the Houthis without incorporating Israel. They're negotiating with Iran. Obviously, Trump's current tour of the Middle East, he's sort of cutting out Israel and disappointing them in 6 different ways. And they're saying, well, Joe Biden would have never done this to us.
But, Nathan, I think I missed a very, very important factor in Trump diplomacy. Money.
Yeah. For our listeners, Katrina just made the money fingers symbol.
Yeah. No, I really believe that there's an attempt to build his personal fortune as well as bring investment, so to speak, into this country. And he's having the dinner tonight with the crypto billionaires and investors. That directly enriches him. The idea that we used to talk about emoluments, which still is part of the scene, in such innocent ways, is kind of mind-boggling. But there's no question that there's a money factor in a lot of the dealings.
Yes, you give him a plane, and he'll love you forever.
The Russia situation is still very, very dangerous. I mean, we forget about not only the nuclear weapons, but they're going to be bringing nuclear reactors into Ukraine for electricity and other factors. And there's an escalation factor that's still in play. And Putin is viewed as a dictator, but he's kind of a referee between different schisms, different factions. There's a much more militaristic faction, which is somewhat based in these four regions in Ukraine, Kherson, Donbass. And Putin's not a peaceable person, but he's seeking a way to be part of the West. He's also seeking to be friends with China. But he could end up being enemies of the West and closer to China, which I think is geopolitically unfortunate.
One of the ways in which Trump is somewhat reassuring is that he does occasionally seem to have flashes of understanding of the danger that nuclear weapons pose to the world. He will say things like, oh, it's so terrible that we spend all this money on nuclear weapons. He even floated the possibility that the United States, Russia, and China should have some grand bargain to reduce their militaries by about 50%. But then, of course, he comes out with a proposal to massively increase the U.S. military budget, and his idea of, I think he calls it the Golden Dome, which is the equivalent of the Iron Dome for America, missile defense, that totally upsets the balance of nuclear deterrence.
But Nathan, here's the deal. Remember Ronald Reagan?
Yes.
Ronald Reagan in Reykjavik, 1986, with Mikhail Gorbachev, they nearly came to an abolitionist agreement.
Yeah, this is crazy. Yeah.
What happened to some extent was that Nancy didn't come with Ron, so he had to go home. If they'd had another day, there's a kind of belief, it's a myth, but a belief that they could have gotten a deal. But Reagan, remember SDI? He believed, based on movies, Hollywood movies and SDI. I do think that there is a discussion about restoring a broader U.S.-Russian relationship within a ceasefire peace negotiation. And there's talk, the last piece of scaffolding of the already weak disarmament work is up for renewal next year. Start 2. And if that's not renewed, it's very tough to rebuild arms control. The guy who really screwed it up was John Bolton, Mr. Frenemy of the first administration of Donald Trump, who under George W. abolished the anti-ballistic missile system. He's almost single-handedly. In any case, Reagan does have these weird flashes, but Trump, because they live in this is a reality show. This is cliched and not quite what he is, but he is a reality show person. If not reality show, Fox is a kind of reality show too. So he watches Fox and then he watches reality shows. And by the way, the obscenity that there's some reality show that's going to start. It's like what's it called? The Killing Fields or the Killing Game. Like if the winner gets a visa.
Oh yeah, their new immigration policy. Yeah.
But there is an arms control piece to this. If you can move to some ceasefire / agreement on Ukraine.
Thanks for watching. This video is a product of Current Affairs Magazine, the country's leading independent left print magazine based here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Go to currentaffairs.org to find out more about us, and currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our absolutely gorgeous bi-monthly print edition. Get it in your mailbox. You can also subscribe to the Current Affairs News Briefing, the Current Affairs Podcast, or you can subscribe to our digital edition. Current Affairs is entirely reader-supported. We have no ads. We have no corporate backers. We depend on you. So please consider purchasing a subscription or making a donation to Current Affairs today. We are a 501c3 non-profit organization, and your donations are tax-deductible to the extent allowable by law. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.